My name is Evelyn Mercer, and at 34, I designed transaction systems that quietly powered millions of purchases every day across the Southeast. Grocery stores, hospitals, shipping centers. Most people never knew my work existed, and honestly, that was fine with me. Invisible systems are usually the ones doing their jobs correctly. My younger brother Carter used to call me the family ghost. At first, it sounded like teasing. Eventually, it became my role. The night everything changed happened at his wedding rehearsal dinner under vineyard lights, with 200 guests listening while my family laughed at a joke meant to humiliate me. Instead, it ruined him. But that comes later. Welcome back to Lasting Echoes. Quiet stories about ordinary women, impossible families, and the moment silence finally stops protecting the wrong people. If you've ever felt invisible inside your own family, this story is for you. Comment below and subscribe for more. 6 weeks before the wedding, I was sitting alone in my apartment near Charlotte eating reheated soup when my phone buzzed with a notification from a family group chat I hadn't seen in over a month. The Mercers. I'd been removed sometime in February without explanation. One day the notification simply stopped. Now I'd been added back. The first message waiting for me was from Carter. "You coming to the wedding or not? Don't make it weird." Right below it, my mother wrote, "Please confirm soon." Harper's family is very particular about numbers. Harper Whitmore was Carter's fiancée, daughter of Leonard Whitmore, founder of Whitmore Capital, a major investor in infrastructure tech companies. I recognized the name because several Whitmore-backed companies used systems my team maintained at Synexus Technologies. At the time, I didn't think much about that connection. Then my father sent a message. "It would mean a lot if you came." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. My father rarely contacted me directly anymore unless he needed help resetting a password or fixing the printer. Here's what you need to understand about the Mercer family. There was room for exactly one success story. According to my parents, that person was Carter. Carter Mercer, startup founder. Carter Mercer, rising entrepreneur. Carter Mercer, featured in glossy business articles, standing in front of exposed brick walls holding expensive coffee. Meanwhile, I was simply Evelyn, the quiet daughter who worked with computers. A few months earlier, my parents had invited neighbors over for dinner. One of them asked what I did for work. Before I could answer, my mother smiled and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, Evelyn handles back-end technical things. Nothing exciting." Then came the line she loved repeating. "We don't really brag about her." Everyone laughed politely. My father looked down at his plate, and Carter grinned like he'd just heard his favorite joke. The rest of dinner became another celebration of Novagrid, Carter's startup, funding rounds, interviews, expansion plans. What nobody mentioned was the fact that my parents had invested almost their entire retirement savings into his company, $130,000, everything they had. Meanwhile, I worked quietly at Synexus, building large-scale routing systems that processed millions of live transactions daily without errors. Nobody bragged about that. For years, I told myself it didn't matter. Then, 3 days after being added back into the family chat, Carter sent me a private message. "Need a small favor before the wedding." And just like that, the past started opening its eyes again. Carter's message sat unread on my phone for almost an hour before I opened it. "Need you to review a few technical docs before the wedding. Shouldn't take long." That single sentence pulled me 4 years backward. Back to the night Carter called me close to midnight, sounding panicked for the first time in his life. At the time, Novagrid barely existed. He had a rented office, a polished pitch deck, and meetings with investors he desperately wanted to impress. What he didn't have was the technology he'd promised them. "I just need a prototype," he told me. "Something functional for the demo." I should have said no. Instead, I spent nearly 3 weeks building him a stripped-down routing engine on my personal laptop after work and on weekends. Clean architecture, modular systems, real infrastructure. The kind of thing I always built. We signed a consulting agreement. He promised payment and technical credit once funding closed. The payment never fully arrived. The credit never appeared at all. A year later, NovaGrid launched publicly with a proprietary infrastructure engine that looked painfully familiar. Same framework patterns, same routing logic. Even some of my naming conventions survived under different labels. I recognized my own work instantly, but I said nothing. Because in my family, Carter's ambition always mattered more than my contribution. I finally opened his message and replied with 2 words: send them. The documents arrived 10 minutes later, 6 pages describing NovaGrid's infrastructure for upcoming investors. I read them carefully from my apartment couch while rain tapped against the windows. Most of it was rewritten well enough to sound original to non-technical people. But the deeper I read, the clearer it became. The core architecture was still mine, not inspired by mine. Mine. He had even reused a load balancing model I'd developed at Synexus years earlier. Worse, several scalability numbers in the report were obviously inflated. Anyone with real infrastructure experience would notice immediately. By the final page, my chest felt heavy. Carter wasn't just borrowing my work anymore. He had built his entire reputation on it. The next morning at Synexus, my coworker Naomi stopped beside my desk holding coffee. "You look like you slept inside a server rack," she said. I laughed weakly and told her about the wedding. Then I mentioned the documents. Naomi's expression changed immediately. "Evelyn, why are you still protecting him?" "I'm not protecting him. You are if you stay quiet." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The truth was complicated. Not because Carter deserved loyalty, but because my parents had tied their future to his company. Their retirement savings, their security, everything. If NovaGrid collapsed, they collapsed with it. That afternoon, I received an email that turned discomfort into something colder. The sender was a technical analyst from Whitmore Capital, Leonard Whitmore's firm. The subject line read, "Request regarding infrastructure authorship." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The email was professional and direct. Their due diligence team had identified architectural similarities between NovaGrid's platform and published systems associated with my work at Synexus. They wanted to schedule a conversation. Nothing accusatory, nothing dramatic, just questions. My stomach tightened anyway, because suddenly the thing I'd spent years pretending wasn't my problem had walked directly into my inbox. That night, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out an old blue folder. Inside was everything: the original consulting agreement, development notes, commit histories, emails, timestamps, proof. I sat there staring at the folder while the apartment stayed completely silent around me. For years, I'd kept those records out of habit, not revenge. Engineers archive their work. That's what we do. But for the first time, I realized something terrifying. The truth didn't need me to chase it anymore. It was already moving on its own. And if Whitmore Capital kept digging, Carter's wedding might become the least of our family's problems. I didn't answer Whitmore Capital right away. For 2 days, the email sat in my inbox while I tried convincing myself the situation would somehow resolve on its own. Maybe their analysts would lose interest. Maybe Carter would fix whatever problems existed before anyone important noticed. Deep down, I already knew better. By Thursday morning, another message arrived. "Miss Mercer, we'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss authorship and provenance related to NovaGrid's infrastructure systems." Provenance. A calm corporate word for a dangerous question. Who actually built this? I stared at the email while live transaction metrics scrolled across my second monitor at Synexus. Millions of payments moving cleanly through systems I had designed. My work had always spoken quietly. Carter's success depended on nobody looking too closely. That afternoon, I called my father. He sounded exhausted before I even spoke. "How's wedding planning?" I asked. A long pause. "Expensive." Then he admitted something I'd already suspected. He and my mother had invested even more money into Novogrid recently. Carter called it temporary support until Whitmore Capital finalized the larger funding round. How much? I asked carefully. Another silence. Enough that we need this to work. I closed my eyes. My parents were in their 60s. They should have been thinking about retirement, not gambling their future on a startup built on unstable foundations. Dad, I started, but I stopped. What was I supposed to say? Your son built his company using my work and hoped nobody important would notice? Instead, I told him I hoped things worked out. The next day, I joined a video call with Whitmore Capital. 2 analysts appeared on screen alongside Leonard Whitmore himself. He looked exactly like the kind of man who noticed details other people missed. The meeting stayed professional. They showed architectural comparisons between Novogrid's infrastructure and systems connected to my published work at Synexus. Routing structures, load balancing models, naming patterns. Every slide felt like someone laying pieces of my career across the table. Finally, Leonard asked directly, "Did you contribute foundational architecture to Novogrid?" I could have lied. I could have protected Carter one more time. Instead, I answered simply, "Yes, no anger, no performance, just truth." I explained the consulting agreement, the prototype work, and the fact that no formal intellectual property transfer had ever happened. When I finished, Leonard leaned forward slightly. "Miss Mercer, unresolved ownership issues at this stage are very serious. Serious." Another quiet word carrying enormous consequences. After the call, I sat alone in my car staring at the Charlotte skyline through the parking garage windows. For the first time, I fully understood what was coming. Investors didn't care about family loyalty. They cared about risk. And Carter's company was full of it. That night, my mother called to discuss wedding seating arrangements. "You'll be at table 11, she said. "Near the back, but you'll still see everything." "Near the back, of course." Then her tone sharpened slightly. "And Evelyn, please don't talk business at the reception. Leonard Whitmore is very involved in Carter's future." There it was. Even without knowing the truth, my family still treated my existence like a threat to his success. After we hung up, I opened the blue folder again and spread the documents across my kitchen table. Contracts, emails, commit histories, proof of years spent shrinking myself so someone else could stand taller. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question I should have asked years earlier. What exactly had my silence protected? Because it certainly had never protected me. And by the time the wedding weekend arrived, I had a feeling silence wasn't going to protect anyone anymore. The rehearsal dinner was held at a vineyard about 40 minutes outside Charlotte. White tablecloths, hanging lights, expensive wine nobody actually finished drinking. Everything looked polished enough to belong in a magazine spread. I found my name card at table 9 near the service entrance. Not hidden exactly, just forgettable. Carter spotted me almost immediately. He crossed the room, smiling like a politician working a fundraiser. "There she is," he said loudly. My mysterious sister finally showed up. He hugged me quickly, more performance than affection. "You look nice," he added. "Simple. Good choice." I almost laughed at that. Simple had always been the role assigned to me in our family. Simple clothes, simple job, simple life. Meanwhile, Carter got to be visionary, brilliant, ambitious. My mother appeared seconds later wearing a pale blue dress and the expression of someone trying very hard to maintain a perfect evening. "Leonard Whitmore is here tonight," she whispered immediately. "Please just relax and enjoy yourself. Don't make things awkward." Translation, stay small. Dinner began with speeches and champagne toasts. Carter moved through the room effortlessly, shaking hands and telling startup stories polished through years of repetition. People loved him. Or maybe they loved confidence. There's a difference. Halfway through dinner, an older man with silver hair stopped beside my table. "You're Evelyn Mercer, right?" I nodded cautiously. "I attended your orchestration panel in Atlanta last year," he said. "Excellent presentation." Before I could answer, Carter suddenly appeared beside us. "My sister's deep into back-end systems," he said quickly with a laugh. "She could probably explain databases for 10 hours straight." The man smiled politely and walked away. Carter's grin disappeared the second he turned back toward me. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "Having dinner. You know what I mean?" I stared at him. For a moment, the confident founder act slipped. Underneath, it was something nervous, tight, fragile. Then my mother joined us again, carrying 2 champagne glasses. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Carter answered too quickly. She looked at me carefully. "Remember, tomorrow isn't about work." I almost asked her when anything had ever been about me. Instead, I stayed quiet. Later that night, I stepped outside onto the vineyard patio to escape the noise. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. That's where Leonard Whitmore found me. He approached calmly, hands in his pockets. "Miss Mercer, Mr. Whitmore." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "You should know my team completed their review this afternoon." I said nothing. "The ownership issues surrounding Novagrid are more severe than your brother understands." There it was. Not suspicion anymore. Confirmation. Leonard looked out across the dark vineyard rows before continuing. "I don't think Carter realizes how visible technical fingerprints become during due diligence." "He always underestimated back-end work," I said quietly. A faint smile crossed Leonard's face. "Yes, founders often do." Then his expression turned serious again. "For what it's worth, your documentation was exceptionally thorough. My documentation, not Carter's, mine." Inside the vineyard hall, laughter erupted from one of the tables. The wedding party was probably starting another toast. Leonard glanced back toward the building. "I imagine tomorrow may become uncomfortable. That would be consistent with family tradition." That actually made him laugh softly. Before leaving, he paused beside the doorway. "One more thing, Miss Mercer." I looked up. People who build real systems rarely need to announce it. Then he walked back inside. I stood alone on the patio for several minutes after that. For years, my family had treated my silence like proof that I lacked value. But outside that room, in the real world, the work had spoken for itself all along. And tomorrow, whether Carter wanted it or not, the truth was walking into that ballroom beside us. The wedding took place the next afternoon at Whitmore Estate. Everything about the property looked designed to intimidate people quietly. Stone pathways, massive gardens, staff moving through the reception hall with practiced precision. Money old enough to stop showing off. I arrived early, wearing a navy dress I'd originally bought for a tech conference I never attended. Nothing flashy, just clean and professional. My mother still looked relieved I hadn't worn anything attention-grabbing. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Harper looked genuinely happy walking down the aisle. Carter looked emotional in the carefully controlled way people do when they know cameras are watching. My parents sat near the front, glowing with pride. I sat 4 rows back beside relatives who barely remembered my name. After the ceremony, guests moved into the reception hall while a string quartet played near the entrance. Tables circled a polished marble dance floor beneath giant chandeliers. And exactly as promised, my seat was at table 11 near the back corner beside a decorative plant tall enough to partially block the view. Carter found me near the bar before dinner started. "There you are," he said, already holding champagne. "Come meet some people." I didn't really have a choice. For the next 20 minutes, he walked me through groups of investors, friends, and extended family, introducing me the same way every time. "This is my sister Evelyn. She's the quiet one. She works in tech support or something." total workaholic. Every introduction shaved away another layer of me until I barely sounded like a real person anymore. At one table, Harper's aunt smiled politely and asked what I actually did for work. Before I could answer, my mother stepped in. "Oh, Evelyn handles back-end computer things. Very technical. Very boring." Everyone laughed lightly. I felt something inside me finally stop bending. Not anger, just exhaustion. Carter leaned closer beside me and whispered, "Relax. Nobody cares about infrastructure talk at weddings." I looked directly at him. "You seem to care a lot." His smile tightened instantly. Before he could answer, movement near the entrance shifted the room's attention. Leonard Whitmore had entered the reception hall. Conversations softened automatically as he moved through the crowd greeting guests. Carter immediately straightened his jacket and walked toward him with visible relief, like a man spotting rescue boats after a storm. A few minutes later, Carter waved me over. I considered ignoring him. Instead, I walked toward the group slowly, water glass still in my hand. My parents stood beside Leonard, smiling too hard. Harper's mother remained politely observant. The moment I reached them, Carter placed a hand on my shoulder and laughed. "This," he announced loudly, "is the family disappointment." A few nearby guests chuckled automatically. My mother smiled into her champagne glass and added her favorite line. "We don't really brag about her. Normally, that would have been the end of it." Another joke, another dismissal, another moment where I absorbed the humiliation quietly so everyone else could stay comfortable. But this time, something changed. Leonard Whitmore didn't laugh. He looked directly at me instead, really looked at me, and then his entire expression shifted. Not shock exactly, recognition. The room around us suddenly felt very still. Carter noticed it too. His smile flickered. Leonard's eyes stayed on me as he spoke carefully. "Evelyn Mercer?" I nodded once. He glanced at Carter, then back at me again. "Well," he said slowly, "this is unexpected." That was all. One sentence. But the atmosphere around the table changed instantly. Because in that moment, Carter realized something terrible. Leonard Whitmore already knew exactly who I was. And suddenly, being the invisible sister in the background didn't look safe for him anymore. The silence around the table stretched longer than it should have. Carter's smile stayed frozen in place, but I could see panic beginning underneath it. "You two know each other?" he asked lightly. Leonard Whitmore ignored the question. He looked directly at me. "You designed Cascade at Synexus, correct?" "Yes." Several people nearby stopped talking altogether. Carter shifted beside me. "Wait, you know her through Synexus?" Leonard finally turned toward him. "My firm licenses infrastructure built on her architecture," he said calmly. The sentence landed like glass hitting marble. My mother blinked rapidly. My father stared at Leonard like he'd misheard him. Carter laughed nervously. Small world. But nobody joined him. Leonard continued speaking in the same measured tone. "My analysts recently completed a technical review of NovaGrid." There it was, the real conversation. Carter straightened immediately. "Right, and we're excited about moving forward. The review raised significant ownership concerns." Carter stopped talking. The air around the table felt thinner now. I could practically hear him recalculating possible exits in real time. Leonard looked back at me. The architectural similarities were substantial enough that my team reached out to confirm authorship. My mother finally spoke. "I'm sorry, authorship of what exactly?" Leonard answered without hesitation. "The core infrastructure NovaGrid is built upon." Carter stepped forward immediately. "Okay, hold on. Evelyn helped with an early prototype years ago. That's all this is." His voice moved too quickly now, too rehearsed. Leonard's expression never changed. Our analysts identified matching, routing structures, dependency trees, and proprietary balancing models connected directly to Miss Mercer's published work. Carter looked at me sharply. I realized then that he genuinely believed I would still protect him, even after years of humiliation, even after being treated like background furniture at my own brother's wedding. "Evelyn," he said carefully, "tell them you only consulted briefly." Every eye at the table shifted toward me. My mother looked terrified. My father looked confused, and Carter looked desperate. I thought about every dinner where my work became a punchline, every introduction designed to make me smaller, every moment I stayed quiet so everyone else could stay comfortable. Then I answered honestly. I built the original architecture. No drama, no raised voice, just facts. The prototype was developed independently under a consulting agreement. The ownership rights were never formally transferred. Carter's face drained of color. "That's not. It's documented," I continued calmly. "Contracts, development logs, timestamps." My mother grabbed my arm hard enough to hurt. "Evelyn," she whispered sharply, "not here." But Leonard Whitmore was already nodding slowly, like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. "That matches our findings." Carter's composure cracked instantly. "You're seriously doing this right now?" he snapped at me. I answered a direct question. "You're trying to sabotage me." "No," I said quietly. "Your documentation did that on its own." For a second, nobody moved. Then Leonard spoke again, calm as ever. "Without clean ownership of the underlying infrastructure, Whitmore Capital cannot proceed with investment." My father actually swayed slightly where he stood. My mother looked like someone had physically struck her. And Carter looked at me with naked hatred for the first time in his life. Not annoyance, not superiority, fear. Because the story he'd spent years building was collapsing in public, and no amount of charm could stop it anymore. Then, in front of wedding guests, investors, and both our families, Carter made the worst mistake of his life. He lost control. And once that happened, everybody finally saw who he really was. Carter snapped. Not loudly at first. At first, it was just a sharp laugh filled with panic. "This is unbelievable," he said, looking around the table. "You're all acting like she built the entire company herself." Nobody answered. That silence made him worse. He pointed at me suddenly. "She's bitter. That's what this is." Evelyn's always been jealous because nobody cared about her little back-end job. My mother immediately jumped in. "Carter, calm down." But she wasn't defending me. She was trying to contain the situation before more people noticed. Too late. Nearby conversations had already stopped. Guests were openly watching now. Even the string quartet sounded quieter somehow. Leonard Whitmore folded his hands calmly. "This isn't personal," he said. "It's a legal and financial issue." "You don't understand how startups work," Carter snapped back. Leonard didn't react. "I understand due diligence very well." That sentence hit harder than shouting ever could. Carter looked around desperately, searching for someone to agree with him. My father stared at the floor. My mother looked seconds away from panic. Harper had finally reached the table, confusion written across her face. "What's happening?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered immediately, because nobody knew how to explain that her new husband's company might not legally own the technology it was built on. Carter turned toward her fast. "It's nothing. Evelyn's exaggerating old consulting work." I spoke before he could keep spinning the story. "I built the original infrastructure prototype." Harper looked at me, then at Carter. "You told me your engineering team built it." "They expanded it," Carter said quickly. Leonard interrupted. "Our review suggests the foundational architecture remained substantially unchanged. Again, calm. Again, devastating." Carter's breathing had become uneven now. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "Fine. Maybe she wrote some early code. Who cares? I turned it into a business. I built Novagrid. No, I said quietly. That got his attention immediately. The room felt completely still. You built a narrative, I continued. Those aren't the same thing. For the first time in his life, Carter had no audience left willing to clap for him. And he couldn't handle it. He grabbed the champagne glass from the table so hard liquid splashed across the linen cloth. You think you're better than me because you hide behind computers all day? He shouted. Several guests nearby turned fully toward us now. Harper looked horrified. You wait until my wedding to humiliate me? You introduced me as the family disappointment 5 minutes ago. That was a joke. No, I said. It was a habit. That landed harder than anything else I'd said, because it was true. My mother stepped forward quickly. Evelyn, enough. I looked at her. For years, I would have stopped immediately. I would have apologized just to restore peace. But peace in our family had always depended on me accepting disrespect quietly. I was done doing that. Carter suddenly grabbed the Crystal Award sitting on a nearby display table, his Emerging Founder of the Year trophy. He held it up wildly. This means something, he shouted. I built something real. I don't think he meant to throw it. I think he meant to prove something. But his hands were shaking too badly. The trophy slipped from his grip, hit the marble floor, and exploded into shards so loudly half the reception gasped. Silence crashed over the ballroom. The word founder remained visible on one broken piece near Carter's shoe. Nobody moved, not even Carter. And in that terrible silence, with shattered glass spread across the floor and hundreds of guests staring at him, the image he had spent years creating finally cracked apart completely. Not because of me, because for the first time, people saw what existed underneath the performance. And it wasn't confidence. It was fear. Nobody spoke for several seconds after the trophy shattered. The entire ballroom felt frozen. Carter stood in the middle of broken glass, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling while guests stared openly now, not admiringly, uncomfortably. Leonard Whitmore finally broke the silence. Carter, he said calmly, I think this conversation is over. That calmness made everything worse. Carter looked at him desperately. You can't seriously pull the investment over this. Leonard's expression never changed. The investment was already under review before tonight. What happened here simply confirmed concerns about transparency. Transparency. Another polite business word hiding a disaster inside it. Harper looked pale beside us. She turned slowly toward Carter. You told me everything was resolved. It is resolved, Carter insisted quickly. Evelyn's blowing this out of proportion. I almost said nothing. Almost. Then Harper looked directly at me and asked quietly, Is that true? I answered honestly. No. That single word seemed to drain the remaining confidence out of Carter completely. My mother stepped in again, voice tight with panic. Leonard, surely this can be worked through privately. Families help each other. Leonard looked at her carefully. Mrs. Mercer, intellectual property disputes involving millions of dollars are not family misunderstandings. My father finally spoke then. His voice sounded small. The retirement money. Carter turned immediately. Dad, stop. But my father kept going. We invested everything. The room somehow became even quieter. Harper looked between them slowly, realization spreading across her face piece by piece. You used their retirement savings too? Carter ran both hands through his hair aggressively. It was temporary. Once the funding closed, everybody would have been fine. Would have. Past tense before anything had even officially ended. Leonard glanced toward me again. Miss Mercer documented her work thoroughly. If ownership challenges proceed legally, this situation could become very expensive. My mother actually swayed slightly. For the first time all night, I saw genuine fear break through her composure. Not fear for me, not even fear for Carter, fear of losing the future she'd tied to him. Then she looked directly at me and said the thing I think she truly believed. You should have stayed quiet. The words hit harder than Carter's insults ever could. Because even now, even standing inside the ruins of a lie, she still thought my job was protecting everyone else at my own expense. I looked at her calmly. I stayed quiet for years. She opened her mouth, then stopped, because there was nothing she could argue with. The documents existed. The agreements existed. The truth existed, whether anyone liked it or not. Harper suddenly removed her wedding ring, not dramatically, not theatrically, just slowly. Then she placed it on the table beside her untouched champagne glass. Carter stared at it like he couldn't process what he was seeing. "Harper, I need space," she said quietly. Then she walked away with her mother following close behind. Carter looked like someone watching a building collapse while still trapped inside it. My father sank into a nearby chair and covered his face with both hands. My mother remained perfectly still beside him. And for the first time in my entire life, nobody at that wedding seemed interested in shrinking me anymore. Because suddenly the quiet daughter who worked with computers was the only person in the room whose story actually held together. Leonard stepped toward me near the ballroom entrance while staff quietly began cleaning broken glass behind us. "For what it's worth," he said, "your reputation in this industry was already established long before tonight." I nodded once. Then he added something I'll probably remember forever. People who build reliable systems rarely need to announce it. The work speaks eventually. And standing there watching my family's carefully constructed mythology collapse under the weight of reality, I finally understood something. Silence hadn't protected me. It had protected the people benefiting from it. And once I stopped carrying that silence for them, the truth didn't need my help anymore. It stood perfectly well on its own. The fallout arrived quietly at first. 3 days after the wedding, Whitmore Capital officially withdrew from the NovaGrid deal. The public statement used careful corporate language about unresolved infrastructure ownership concerns, but everyone in the local tech world understood what it meant. Without the investment, NovaGrid started collapsing fast. Other investors backed away almost immediately. Partnerships stalled. Reporters who once called Carter a visionary founder suddenly stopped returning his calls. The story holding his company together had cracked, and once people started looking closely, the cracks were everywhere. I went back to work the following Monday. No dramatic entrance, no speeches, no celebration. Just my desk, my monitors, and millions of transactions moving through systems that still worked exactly the way they were supposed to. Naomi rolled her chair over beside me holding coffee. "You okay?" she asked. I thought about it honestly before answering. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I actually am." Because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the responsibility of protecting people who never protected me. My father called later that week. Not about Carter, not about the investment, just me. "How are you doing, Evie?" I nearly cried hearing that nickname again. He hadn't used it since I was a teenager. We talked for almost an hour, mostly small things, but underneath the conversation sat something new. Awareness. For the first time, I think my father finally understood how much silence had cost me. My mother took longer. Nearly 2 weeks passed before she texted me. "You could have warned us." I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I tried to tell the truth for years. Nobody wanted to hear it. She didn't answer. part of me used to believe there would eventually be a perfect moment where my family suddenly recognized my value and apologized for everything. Real life doesn't work like that. Some people can admit mistakes. Others can only survive by rewriting history around them. Carter never contacted me again directly. I heard pieces of updates through relatives. Novagrid downsized heavily. Legal teams became involved. Harper moved out permanently. And Carter? Apparently, he still told people I sabotaged him. Maybe he truly believed that. But protecting someone from the consequences of their own choices isn't love, it's maintenance. And I was done maintaining a version of reality that required me to disappear inside it. A month after the wedding, I finally attended the infrastructure summit in Atlanta that I'd nearly declined earlier that year. I stood on stage in front of hundreds of engineers discussing scalable transaction systems and live routing architecture. Nobody introduced me as the quiet one. Nobody reduced my work to back-end nonsense. They introduced me by my actual accomplishments. And afterward, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me holding a notebook against her chest. "I just wanted to say your panel was incredible," she said nervously. "I'm starting out in systems engineering, and honestly, seeing another woman up there helped. For years, I thought invisibility made me safe. What it really did was teach other people I would accept being overlooked. That ended the night I finally stopped shrinking for everyone else's comfort. The truth is, my family spent years treating loudness like value, attention like achievement, confidence like competence. Meanwhile, I built systems that carried enormous weight quietly every single day without failing. And eventually, the real world noticed what my family never did. Not because I fought for attention, because the work spoke for itself. That's my story. A wedding built on performance, a family addicted to appearances, and a woman who finally realized she was never the failure in the room. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you in the next story.